Hey, thanks for the opportunity to come speak with you, and thanks for the introduction. Again, I'm going to start today. My name is Lindsey. I'm a new hire in the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science. I teach classes in seed science and in agronomy. I'm also doing a class to try to help prepare some of our OSU students to take the Certified Crop Advisor exam. So it's an exciting opportunity. I'm glad to be on board with the team. And as soon as I started, Dr. Ryan Hayden kind of brought me on and got me involved with the interseeding material that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm pretty excited to talk to you guys about what we're doing and what we're seeing, and see if you have any questions or comments when we conclude our presentation today. So, as we all know, cover crops are growing in popularity, and there's a lot of questions revolving how to implement them, what species to choose, where to put them into our rotations, and how to make them effective for us. So there's multiple different species that can do different things for us. For instance, our legume cover crops like hairy vetch or red clover can potentially provide some in credit if we get good biomass in the fall and good nodulation activity. Other cover crops like cereal rye and winter wheat are good at wintering over, providing us with good soil coverage, good root development, potentially using or taking up some of those free nutrients that are available in the fall and potentially in the spring, and locking those up to prevent them from being lost. And other cover crops like oats and forage radish may have utility in a situation where winter kill is the preferred method of termination. So those will provide some coverage, some rapid biomass accumulation in the fall, potential use for a forage crop or something like that in the fall. But you don't have to worry about having green residue available in the spring that you'll have to deal with when planting into and terminating in the spring and competing with your grain crop. So there's a lot of different cover crops out there, and they all have different utility. But one of the major challenges we have, especially here in Ohio, is getting a cover crop into our rotation. So the predominant rotation for most of our producers are corn-soy rotation. And those are typically long, summer annual crops that are planted in the spring, usually in the month of May, and are harvested in late September, early October. And in a survey that went around through the Conservation Technology Information Center, one of the largest challenges identified by over 800 farmers was not enough time to get a cover crop established with harvest challenges. So how do we get a cover crop established in the fall to produce biomass to actually do something for us, especially over those winter months, and potentially give us a lot of soil coverage for utility in the spring, that sort of thing. In Ohio, one of the most popular crops that we have right now from cover crops is cereal rye, because this can often be seeded in mid to late November, still produce enough biomass to establish and give us a good stand in the spring, but you run into the issue with termination. So is there a potential opportunity for getting cover crops in our system a little bit earlier? So this chart is kind of showing some of the potential opportunities for interseeding, some of the benefits, and potentially some of the trade-offs. So what you see in that chart is the light gray material is the biomass that's typically produced by our major crop of interest, either corn in the first set of tiles or soybeans in the second set of tiles. With a typical drill seeding of a cover crop after harvest in the fall, you get kind of that second bank of graphs. The dark green chart there is showing basically biomass accumulation after drill seeding, after harvest. And so biomass accumulation, while it can be evident, may be less as compared to if you're able to seed that cover crop a little bit sooner, as you see in the bank in the third row or the fourth row. Basically, the third row is showing a winter-killed cover crop, and the fourth row is showing a cover crop that overwinters. But basically, if you can seed that cover crop closer to that midpoint of the summer, when biomass in the corn or soybeans start to drop kind of during that leaf senescence phase, could you potentially increase establishment, increase biomass in the fall, and increase the ability of that cover crop to provide services for your ecosystem? So that's kind of where we're at with this talk here. It's looking at different ways of interseeding. And some of the two that are more popular, right now at least, are using an aerial interseeding method or a high clearance seeder for interseeding. And some of the pros for this is you can cover a fairly large amount of acreage at a time. You can drive through the crop that's standing with minimal crop damage. But some of the major drawbacks of this is that you typically have to use a slightly higher seeding rate than you would with a drill seeder or some sort of planter. because the seed to soil contact is not as great. Typically when you apply with these type of methods, the seeds stay on the soil surface, and germination could be limited by the amount of moisture on the topsoil. So establishment could be a little bit slower, and a successful establishment may be limited with this type of method. Some researchers at Penn State University and Interseeder Technologies developed a high-clearance drill seeder that could potentially be used to interseed cover crops in the corn stands a little bit sooner than you typically see. So this is showing one that we actually purchased for some of our research plots. It basically has 7.5-inch rows that it drills between the corn rows to establish a cover crop. And this is typically driven through between V4 and V7 growth stage. So you typically plant the cover crop before canopy closure. The cover crop germinates, emerges, and goes into kind of a summer stable growth pattern. It doesn't really accumulate much biomass, but it's there so that when you potentially harvest that corn for grain in the fall, you'll have cover crop biomass established that would be there and able to take off in the system. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at here.
What chemical program is friendly for that system?
We will talk about that in just a minute, and I'll have Alex share a little bit about that. But for the moment, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Ryan Hayden. I'm based at Ohio State ATI, and I got here in the fall of 2014. And that fall, I was teaching a course in soil management to my students there at ATI. And one of the things that they asked when I was sharing some of the recent work on interseeded cover crops was, would it be possible for us to get a cover crop interseeder? And I hadn't really thought about it, but I passed the hat around to some of my colleagues, and we were able to get the money together to buy a 2-row model of Penn State's cover crop interseeder that's being manufactured by Interseeder Tech. And then the following spring, when Alex came on, we got a second one that is based at the Western Branch Research Station. So now at Ohio State, we have 2 cover crop interseeders that we're working with. And we want to share some of our early results from this work. And we've got experiments that we're running in Wooster, Custer, and South Charleston that we can report on. However, before I get into those data, I want to show some information as to where some of the early work in drill interseeding has taken place, the type of cropping system. One of the cropping systems where we see a lot of opportunity for interseeding cover crops is in silage corn. And this makes sense because since you're taking the silage corn off early, you've got a much larger window of time in the fall for that cover crop to grow, put on biomass, and essentially enhance those ecosystem services that Alex was talking about. The other advantage is since you're taking off the residue, you don't have all of that trash landing on top of the cover crop that can impede growth after harvest. And not only that, but you've also got a lot of opportunity in livestock systems to potentially utilize that cover crop, maybe for a spring hay cutting, or in beef production systems, where a lot of folks here in Ohio do like to graze corn stalks. Wouldn't it be nice to graze those corn stalks with something green in between? So we see a lot of opportunities in this context. And some recent work by some of our colleagues at Cornell University is basically asking several important questions regarding interseeded cover crops. First and foremost, is it going to potentially have a negative impact on my silage yields? And one of the things that I can indicate is that in this first column, we've got the silage yield where no cover crop has been established. And then each of these other three bars are treatments where either a legume and a grass was interseeded, a legume on its own, or a annual ryegrass on its own. And none of those examples in this particular experiment was silage yield negatively impacted. One of the things that you can also see on this bottom part of the panel here is that between 1 and 2 tons of biomass per acre is possible to be harvested in the early spring. And so that provides a lot of opportunities and helps to show us. I'm just going to hold this. That's okay. So what we decided to do when we started our research program was to see if we could extend this early success with drill interseeding to a cropping system where corn was being grown for grain. And so we set up first in 2015 at one site in Wooster a research trial that was designed to answer several questions. One, we wanted to compare drill interseeding to broadcast interseeding and see if there were any differences in establishment, particularly when we're interseeding at the V5 to V6 stage. And we also wanted to see which cover crop species tended to do well in this type of system. The corn canopy is a pretty challenging environment for cover crops to be successful. And so we wanted to see if there were any differences across those different cover crop species. And we also wanted to see if interseeding potentially reduced corn yield and get at that question that growers were asking us as to what the risks might be. So in 2015, we did it at one site, and then this past summer, we expanded to 2 other sites, to South Charleston and Custer. Our main treatments were, we had a control treatment where no cover crop was interseeded. This is essentially a continuous corn system that we started with. We then also had a treatment with an annual ryegrass cover crop, another with red clover, and another with tillage radish. And then this past year, we also added a 3-species mixture to our treatments. And then each of those treatments were interseeded using one of 2 different seeding approaches. We either seeded with a high clearance drill or surface broadcast. And if you guys remember about the conditions of 2015, you'll remember that it was a very, very wet year, and at least in the spring. And that was really perfect conditions for germinating cover crops, irrespective of your seeding method. And then after that, it was followed by a very, very dry August. And so we wanted to share with you a little bit about what those first year's results were. So the first thing I want to point out is across all of the treatments, there were no major significant differences among yields. So that's good. There wasn't any indication that the cover crops detracted from yields. And in fact, most of our cover crop treatments actually had marginally higher yields. The other thing that you'll notice is that irrespective of drill or broadcast seeding method, we had very good establishment across all of the different cover crops that year. So if you take a look at that cover crop biomass in November of 2015, that gives you an indication. The following spring, we also collected biomass, and not surprisingly, the biomass from tillage radish was nil. as what you would expect with a winter kill. But then we also saw that the biomass from our red clover treatments, both for drill as well as broadcast, were about in the range of 1,200 to 1,300 pounds of biomass. So that was overall a pretty good success for the first year. The other thing I'll note is we also measured percent green cover, which we did with a pretty cool new iPhone app called the Canopio app. And it allows us to basically look at the green pixels that are occupied by the cover crop. And we can see notable differences in the amount of green cover between our red clover and our annual ryegrass treatments. All right, so moving into 2016, and I'm going to focus on Wooster here initially. If you remember, this year was a quite a dry June, and we essentially interseeded in June, right during that period of kind of the most intense part of the drought. And so this particular year, we didn't get as good of an establishment in our cover crops. And so let's take a look at what those results look like. First thing I'll point out is our grain yields. And basically, we planted the same treatments in the same plots as we did the previous year. And so a couple of things stand out. In our red clover treatments from the previous year, we worked that red clover into the ground, and the subsequent yields from those plots were significantly higher, to the tune of almost 20 bushels to the acre higher in that first year. So some indication of a nice carryover effect in that first year. The annual ryegrass treatments also were higher, but not significantly so. And so we'll keep an eye on those in the next year. The other thing I'll note is that the cover crop biomass was notably lower. That year we really got hammered with the dry weather, but we still saw cover crop biomass in the range of anywhere from 50 to, in some cases, 600 pounds in the fall. And so we'll follow that through this upcoming spring and see how those overwintered. And in future years, we'll report back on that. All right, I'll hand off to Alex again.
So Ryan did a good job explaining the results we saw at Wooster and kind of the legacy effect going from 2015 into 2016. So the material that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation were two sites that we established in 2016, utilizing the same typical protocol. We had the 3 species plus the 4-way mix, both interseeded and broadcast applied, compared to a conventional corn no-cover control. We had this repeated at the 2 sites at Custer, Ohio, which is in northwest Ohio, and South Charleston, which is in western Ohio, kind of halfway between Columbus and Dayton. But at the northwest location in Custer, we planted our corn on May 20th. But then we had intermittent rains, which kind of prevented us from getting to interseed our cover crops until we got to that V6 growth stage, and that didn't occur until about June 28th. The rain was coming in large batches, so it was very difficult for us to time and get in. Right when it started to dry out enough, we'd get another rain, it seemed. So it was really a challenge to get that cover crop interseeded. But once we finally got that cover crop interseeded on the 28th of June, we had a very, very dry July, which severely limited our cover crop germination and establishment at that location, as we'll talk about coming up. At the South Charleston location in 2016, we were able to plant our corn on May 19th and had a timely interseeding of June 14th. We got that cover crop interseeded. But After we interseeded, June turned a little bit dry, so we had a little bit less rain. But then in July, August, and September, we had substantial rainfall that came very frequently. And so that ended up impacting some of our results that I'll talk about here in the next few slides. So this is showing a very similar chart to what Ryan showed from Wooster in 2016, except this is showing from our Custer location in Northwest Ohio. Remember, as soon as we got our cover crop interseeded on June 28th, it turned extremely dry, and that resulted in poor cover crop biomass production this fall. Basically, it ranged anywhere from 0 to 30 pounds of cover crop biomass produced per acre, which is not very good. From a statistical standpoint, the drill did establish a little bit better than the broadcast treatments, but it still wasn't necessarily an overwhelming success as we would have hoped for this type of treatment. Wheat biomass was fairly comparable to what we saw with regards to the cover crop contributions. We will plan to see what happened after harvest in the fall. Report is that the annual ryegrass treatments started to recover this fall with some of the rains that we had, so it'll be interesting to see in April what type of biomass we have out in that field plot. At the South Charleston location, again, we had a dry June followed by an extremely wet July and August, which kind of drove some of our results we saw here. Basically, as soon as we interseeded, we started to get frequent rains, which stimulated some of our weeds to germinate as well. And part of the issue was we were past the residual window for the herbicide program that we had used in the system, so a lot of our herbicides that were done to prevent injury to the cover crop also didn't help us control any weeds, which ended up coming on with abundance during July and August. So you can see our weed biomass was fairly substantial as compared to the cover crop biomass from the respective plots. So this year it seems that the weeds may have went out at this one location, given this weather pattern. But we do plan to repeat these experiments in 2017 as well. So just some summation from those latter two sites. Basically, that dry July and altered rainfall pattern throughout the rest of the summer resulted in limited cover crop establishment. But tillage radish seemed to do the best of the three species that we evaluated. It seemed to have the highest and most consistent biomass, regardless of whether we drill planted or interseeded, or broadcast applied. So that could be something to keep an eye on in the future, especially in those locations. We did have really good corn yields, regardless of location. Again, grain yield was not severely impacted by our treatments, but we still had yields above 200 bushels at the South Charleston location and about 160 bushels per acre at the Northwest location. So again, we plan to repeat in 2017. So some considerations. We found that interseeding at V5 to V6 poses little risk to corn yields from possible competition for water and nutrients. Even when interseeding with a drill, cover crop emergence is still heavily reliant on environmental conditions, particularly adequate rainfall following interseeding. And cover crops appear to suffer more from drought than the corn did, especially in some of our locations.